We all know about the Shonen Big Three, and those are classics. But with time, the recent Dark Trio brings us new and improved content, so let's talk a little about that. If there's one problem that the Big Three has now, it's that it's become a bit old. If we talk about Bleach, with more than 300 episodes, it had really epic fight scenes and the animation was endearing. But it just pales in comparison to the Dark Trio. It's become leagues beyond the Shonen Big Three, and to be fair, it is more of a result of the changing times than a better quality of animation. Like Hell's Paradise, it was released only this year, but people love it, and part of why people love it so much is because the animation is just stunning. And with time, these animations will just improve more and more. There is another thing that the Big Three have done kind of poorly, and that's deviating from the source material. Bleach in particular is one of the worst offenders. The manga that Tite Kubo wrote was much more intense than the anime. It took almost 10 years with the release of the Thousand-Year Blood War to really realize Kubo's vision. The Dark Trio avoids this issue really well by sticking to the material a lot more. Let me talk about Chainsaw Man, that anime that is so close to Tatsuki Fujimoto's work that they even replicated his cinematic actions and paneling. Now, yes, they aren't completely close to the original works, but they follow it a lot more than the previous shonen anime. Now, another thing you might notice in older shonen anime is all the filler. I have to mention Naruto in this one because if it has 1,000 episodes, half of them are just not progressing any sort of plot. This is because of how the broadcasting requirements were much more demanding than they are now. The creators have more time to work on the animation and story since episodes are released every week. I mean, look at Jujutsu Kaisen. The creators can avoid rushing, and they even have a 2-year gap between Season 1 and Season 2. We can only expect that in this way, the quality would remain preserved, or even be better because there isn't a strict deadline. Now, the filler wasn't the only problem. Some plot lines and arcs just lasted too long. Some of the biggest wars in One Piece are an offender to this, because the Wano Country arc began in 2019 and it still isn't over. Dragging on fights and arcs for too long just makes us bored sometimes, because it feels like it's just been going on forever and we just want to see something new or get to the next arc. The Dark Trio tackles this problem by finishing arcs much earlier, not too quickly and not too slow. It's just the perfect length. Chainsaw Man finished Katana Man's arc in the first season, and yes, we'll get to see him more in the second one, but it wasn't 15 episodes of just Katana Man. We got to see other characters and villains as well. In Jujutsu Kaisen, some of the major fights ended in a duration of 24 episodes. This kind of pace just keeps us engaged a little bit more. I'm not trying to say that the originals are bad, but please don't make me go through another 30 episodes of Goku vs. Frieza. Now, another thing we saw in previous shonen anime was the talk between fights, where they would just, explain their plans and abilities during battle. This has become so common that the fans even meme about its stereotypical nature. This kind of cliche needlessly dragged out fights, and the recent Dark Trio just handles it better, making it brief and relying more on showing rather than telling. Or just not even telling us anything. Jujutsu Kaisen's complicated cursed system was sometimes just taking the backseat during the stunningly animated fights. This just shows how shonen anime has come a long way since the old days. Man, I'm getting old. The anti-heroes in the Big Three were more, they were nicer at times. You could even call them role models, as they hadn't done anything that was too terrible. I'll make Ichigo and Naruto an example. They were troublemakers and delinquents, but they often suppressed their dark side. They just had a moral compass that they couldn't ignore. Now, if we talk about Denji or Yuji Itadori, they wouldn't be as hesitant to get their hands bloody if they needed to save or protect someone. And Gabimaru? Well, he's just straight up a murderer without a sweat. This change in typical shonen anime is something the Dark Trio brought to the table where the Big Three couldn't. It gave anti-heroes an actually dark side that they didn't suppress. The Big Three back in the day were really held back by the broadcast rules. Even though the source material wasn't as child-friendly, the anime would censor a lot of stuff. Bleach was incredibly censored, but now, thanks to some level of leniency, we can see a more accurate display of the manga's adaptations with Chainsaw Man and Hell's Paradise just letting loose. Even Berserk was fairly censored back in the day, but Jujutsu Kaisen doesn't have to face that problem, letting us feel the intensity of the battles through disturbing and gruesome imagery. It can be extreme at times, but that's just what makes the Dark Trio stand out that much more from the Big Three. Now, unlike the Big Three, the Dark Trio doesn't shy away from just being that dark. A lot of the deaths in anime, like Naruto and One Piece, were softened by fun adventures. In Bleach, no one in particular really died. They were less emotion-driven deaths, and I'm not saying that the deaths weren't impactful at all, but it quickly went back to normal so young viewers don't get too depressed. For the Dark Trio, they give more of an intense implication to the deaths and are more permanent. We don't go immediately to adventures and fun narratives. Instead, the impact lingers a bit longer. We can take Hell's Paradise and Jujutsu Kaisen, for example, or even Chainsaw Man, where the plot is a lot darker than some edgy coming-of-age story. I mean, these anime are even often mistaken for seinen due to their mature themes. The power of friendship, believing in your companions, and fighting for what's right weren't exactly cliches that the Big Three introduced first, as there were many before that followed the same trope. But, like many anime that came after the Big Three, the Dark Trio followed this established format to an extent as well. Now, I say to an extent because in Chainsaw Man, Denji's story isn't exactly your typical shonen anime type, and it's actually pushing the boundaries with a not-so-typical protagonist portrayed through the narrative of existential dread, surrealism, and gore. Now, one of the reasons older shonen fans would visit the Big Three would be for the sense of nostalgia and reminiscing about the good old days, since the Big Three still offers an appealing narrative that isn't present in recent anime anymore. Naruto and One Piece took a while to get to the point where it can also appeal to older audiences, while for Bleach, it took only recently with the 1,000-Year Blood War to catch up. The Dark Trio is just more age-appropriate for older fans who want something more out of shonen anime.